Episode: When a friend keeps canceling, understanding, healing, and reclaiming your balance. Part 1: Seeing the reality without losing your heart. There is a particular kind of hurt that slips under the surface of everyday life. It's quiet, almost invisible, and yet it carries the weight of unspoken questions. You make plans with someone you care about, a friend you trust, a friend whose presence you enjoy, and then, once again, the message arrives. Something came up. I'm so sorry, I can't make it. Can we reschedule? You read the words, and although they are familiar, they still cause a small shift inside your chest, a momentary sinking, a hint of disappointment that you try your best to ignore. You tell yourself it's fine. You tell yourself that next time will be different. But it rarely is. The pattern becomes a quiet rhythm, the plan, the hope, the cancellation, the internal negotiation, the hope again. What makes this so psychologically complex is that the cancellations are rarely dramatic. They're rarely chaotic or aggressive. They happen softly. They happen politely. They happen with just enough of a reasonable explanation that you feel guilty for feeling hurt. And you start telling yourself that maybe you're being too sensitive, too needy, too demanding. Maybe life is really just busy. Maybe they're overwhelmed. Maybe you should simply be more understanding, more patient, more flexible. And yet, somewhere inside you, a deeper truth stirs: this hurts because it means something. This hurts because part of you is realizing, even if you don't want to accept it, that your friend may not be showing up for you in the way you show up for them. And your brain, when faced with this discrepancy, does something both fascinating and deeply human. It clings to potential. It clings to the best memories. It clings to what you wish this person could be. Not to what their actions consistently show. To understand this internal conflict, we need to look at two mechanisms of the mind that quietly shape your emotional reality: prediction patterns and attachment scripts. Prediction patterns are how the brain creates a sense of safety in the world. Your mind constantly builds models of people: she's reliable. He's thoughtful. They care about me. These models are efficient shortcuts. They help you navigate relationships without having to reassess everything from scratch. But when someone behaves inconsistently, your brain doesn't immediately update the model. It resists. Because updating a model means admitting that the landscape has changed. It means accepting uncertainty, and uncertainty threatens your emotional equilibrium. So what you do instead is hold on to the old model and explain away the new evidence. This is where attachment scripts come in. Our attachment styles, formed early, reinforced throughout life, shape how we interpret inconsistency. If you grew up having to earn affection, you may instinctively tolerate uncertainty from others. You may even feel strangely familiar with it. The cancellations, although painful, might echo patterns you've known before. And this familiarity can make you cling harder, not because the relationship is healthy, but because the pattern feels recognizable. The problem, however, is that every repetition of this cycle slowly erodes your sense of self-worth. You start shrinking your own needs. You start rationalizing away your own disappointment. You start acting as if your time, your excitement, your emotional investment are somehow less valuable than theirs. You tell yourself the story that being understanding is noble, but there is a fine line between understanding and self-neglect. When someone repeatedly cancels plans, it is not merely an inconvenience. It is a message. Not necessarily a malicious one. Not necessarily a conscious one. But a message nonetheless: I may not prioritize this connection the way you do. The core of the hurt often comes not from the cancellation itself, but from the internal contradiction you're forced to wrestle with. The contradiction between your hope and their behavior. Between the friendship you believe you have and the friendship you actually experience. Understanding this contradiction is the first step toward healing. Not blaming. Not attacking. Not creating an enemy. But acknowledging reality without looking away. Because emotional suffering arises when we want reality to be something other than what it is. Peace begins when we allow ourselves to see clearly. But clarity, without compassion, can be harsh. So let me say this with softness and truth. Your disappointment makes sense. Your hurt is valid. You are not being dramatic or needy. You are simply responding to a pattern that signals imbalance. You are feeling the discomfort of being in a place where your emotional investment is not matched. And that hurts because you are human, and because connection matters to you. In part 2, we will explore the psychology of the person who keeps canceling, not to excuse the behavior, but to understand the forces behind it. And from there, we will build a way forward, a path rooted not in anger, not in fantasy, but in emotional clarity and self-respect. Part 2, Why They Keep Canceling, the Psychology Behind Inconsistency. To understand what is happening in this dynamic, we need to look gently but honestly at the other side of the equation. Because people who repeatedly cancel plans are not all the same, and their reasons are rarely as simple as, they don't care. Human behavior. Especially inconsistent behavior, emerges from a complex blend of emotional habits, avoidance tendencies, personality structure, and unhealed patterns. And you can't navigate the situation intelligently unless you understand the landscape behind the actions. Let's begin with something crucial. Their behavior is information. It is not an accusation. It is not a character sentence. It is not a declaration of their moral worth. It is simply information, delivered through action rather than promise. So let's explore the 4 primary psychological categories that often lead to repeated canceling. The first category is avoidant overwhelm. These are people who genuinely want to see you, they're not lying when they say yes, but their internal world becomes chaotic quickly. They underestimate their energy levels, overcommit, and then, when the day comes, anxiety or fatigue takes over. They cancel not because they don't care, but because their emotional bandwidth collapses. They may feel shame, they may feel guilt, but instead of communicating honestly, they retreat. This is not a sign of malice, but it is a sign of emotional dysregulation. And relying on someone who cannot regulate themselves is painful. The second category is passive prioritization. These individuals like you, they appreciate you, but you are not at the top of their priority hierarchy. They don't think deeply about it. They don't reflect on the impact of their behavior. Life presents them with opportunities, impulses, or distractions, and they follow those without considering the commitment they made. They are not intentionally hurting you, but they are not intentionally protecting the connection either. And a relationship without intentionality cannot thrive. The third category is conflicted affection. This is common and confusing. These individuals care about you but fear emotional closeness. They may enjoy time with you deeply, but vulnerability activates their internal alarms. So they oscillate, they want connection, then they pull away. They say yes, then they retreat. They create inconsistency because inconsistency is emotionally safer for them than stability. Their cancellations are not about you, they are about their own anxiety around intimacy, friendship, or expectation. The fourth category is self-centered convenience. And while this is less gentle to hear, it is important to acknowledge. Some people simply operate with themselves at the center of every decision. They cancel when something better comes along. They cancel because they assume you'll understand. They cancel because your feelings do not register in their emotional field. These individuals often don't apologize sincerely because, in their inner world, the inconvenience to you feels negligible compared to their own preferences. Now, you might be tempted to ask, but which category applies to my friend? Here is the difficult but liberating truth, it doesn't matter. Because regardless of the underlying psychology, the outcome is the same. You end up waiting, hoping, adjusting, forgiving, interpreting. You end up carrying the emotional weight of uncertainty. You end up living on the promise of next time, even as your body begins to understand that next time rarely arrives. But understanding their psychology is still valuable, for one reason: it allows you to separate compassion from self-sacrifice. You can empathize with someone's overwhelm without allowing them to deplete you. You can understand their attachment patterns without becoming collateral to them. You can recognize their fears without abandoning your own emotional needs. This is where neuroscience, once again, becomes useful. When someone's behavior is unpredictable, your brain enters what psychologists call a high-volatility relational state. In this state, each new interaction becomes a prediction challenge. Your brain burns more energy trying to anticipate whether the plan will happen or not. You think you're just waiting for a message, but your nervous system is actually cycling through micro-alertness. Checking your phone, calibrating expectations, replaying earlier cancellations, preparing yourself emotionally for disappointment while still hoping to avoid it. This creates tension. It creates anxiety. It creates emotional fatigue. And here is the most important insight. Your brain is trying to resolve the contradiction by hoping for improvement. Because hope, even unrealistic hope, is neurologically cheaper than restructuring your entire understanding of the friendship. But clarity demands restructuring. Not by rejecting the person. Not by blaming yourself. But by updating your model of reality. This person may not be capable, right now, of offering consistent companionship. This person may not prioritize you in a way that meets your emotional needs. This person may not be intentionally hurting you, but their behavior is hurting you nonetheless. You don't need to judge them to acknowledge the impact. And that acknowledgement is where your healing begins. In Part 3, we will explore how to navigate this situation with strength, grace, and emotional self-respect. You will learn how to adjust your expectations, communicate with clarity, protect your peace, and restore your balance, all while keeping your heart open, not hardened. Part 3, Regaining Your Balance: How to Respond, Heal, and Move Forward. Once you understand what is happening, both inside you and inside the dynamic, you gain the space to make choices from clarity instead of disappointment. You are no longer reacting to a cycle. You are stepping outside of it. And from this place, you can rebuild your emotional grounding. The first step is simple but transformative. You must accept the pattern as it is, not as you wish it were. This is not resignation. This is liberation. Because wishing for consistency from someone who has shown a pattern of inconsistency is like trying to build a house on shifting sand. You will always be adjusting, repairing, recalculating. Your emotional state becomes tied to unpredictability rather than stability. So the first action is internal. You gently acknowledge that this friend does not show up consistently. You don't justify it. You don't vilify it. You simply recognize it as fact. Now, from this grounded place, you can make decisions. And those decisions fall into 3 graceful categories: recalibration, communication, and redirection. Recalibration means adjusting your expectations to match reality. If a friend consistently cancels, then you no longer invest the same emotional energy into making plans. You stop basing your mood on whether the plan will happen or not. You stop counting on them for companionship in moments that matter deeply to you. You create emotional distance, not out of punishment, but out of self-protection and self-respect. This is the heart of healthy boundaries. Responding to reality instead of fantasy. Communication is the next step, but communication rooted in calm clarity, not frustration. You don't accuse. You don't generalize. You name the pattern with gentle honesty. You say something like, "I enjoy spending time with you, but I've noticed plans often get cancelled. I want to understand what's happening so I can adjust my expectations. Consistency matters to me." This is simple, direct, and dignified. You state your experience without blaming. You invite an explanation without demanding it. You give them the chance to be honest, but you do not rely on their answer to determine your next step. Their words matter far less than their future actions. And this leads to the final category, redirection. Redirection means choosing where to invest your emotional energy moving forward. Maybe this friend remains in your life, but in a lighter capacity. Maybe you stop initiating plans and allow them to initiate instead. Maybe you open more space for people who already demonstrate reliability, presence, and reciprocity. You do not cut ties with a knife, you simply shift your center of gravity. You place yourself in the company of people who nourish your sense of connection rather than deplete it. This process, though calm, is incredibly powerful. Because it breaks the internal loop that caused the emotional harm in the first place. You are no longer hoping for next time. You are no longer waiting for the pattern to change. You are no longer compromising your emotional balance. You are no longer shrinking your needs to maintain a relationship that is not meeting you halfway. Instead, you are reclaiming your time, your energy, and your self-worth. And perhaps the most healing part is this: once you step back, you begin to notice something. The disappointment softens. The emotional volatility diminishes. You start centering your life around people, experiences, and commitments that feel reciprocal. The emotional fog lifts. You regain clarity. And in that clarity, you begin to realize that the situation was not about your worth, it was about alignment. Some relationships are beautiful but inconsistent. Some people are kind but overwhelmed. Some connections feel meaningful but cannot sustain the weight of expectation. Accepting this truth does not harden your heart, it frees it. So we end on this positive note, this gentle truth. You deserve relationships where presence is natural. Where consistency doesn't need to be begged for. Where effort is mutual. Where the connection feels stable, warm, and faithful. You deserve friendships where plans aren't promises that dissolve, but moments that unfold. Where you feel chosen, not as an afterthought, but as a genuine priority. And every time you choose clarity over fantasy, every time you choose emotional balance over self-doubt, you take a step closer to a life filled with people who match your efforts, honor your time, and meet you in the same place where you stand. This is how healing happens. This is how you return to yourself. This is how you build the kind of relationships that bring peace instead of confusion.